Once a year, I give a seminar on my favorite topic, brain. And last time, I gave a seminar about stress and how stress is affected by different factors. And then there was a lot of questions from students about exercise. And then I remember saying, it's okay, it's a whole totally different topic of discussion, and I'll talk about it in a separate topic. So I decided I'll just do a special seminar just on exercise and how it affects the brain. And I'll hope to keep it fun and light and not too heavy. You will probably still see a lot of terms, but just go with it. This is a general outline of my talk today. I will start with the fact that originally people thought the brain is unchanged organ, just like anything else. It's fixed, and you're born with it, and you die with it. And then in the past about 20 years, we start finding different things that says that brain changing. Brain grows, brain shrinks, all of this cool stuff. So I'll go a little bit around that part. And then I'll talk about growing your brain, which is probably will be the major part of this talk, because we're all here to grow our brains, right? And then I will go into some chemical pathways, very likely, because otherwise, like, who will trust me if I'll tell you that exercise is good for you, right? Unless I'll show you how it actually works. And then I'll touch a little bit on how exercise affects mood disorders, which is a totally separate topic, but I do want to touch on it in this today's lecture. And then dementia is another very important factor in exercising, which I will probably spend some time on. And one of my favorite is runner's high. Some of you hear about runner's high. Somebody wondering what it is. Have you ever experienced it? So I'll talk a little bit about what does it mean, if it's a real thing or not. And then I save some time specifically to go over what kind of exercise, how much exercise is enough, what can you do to get the best benefits for your brain. So I want to start actually with a very simple cartoon, and this is my daughter. And what she's doing? She's snowboarding with me, and what she's doing now, she's falling. Analyzing what just happened, get up, do it, and go, and does exactly the same thing, and oops, a little better, then goes again, try it one more time. Young kids are amazing. I'm so jealous how quickly they learn things, because they just fall and get up and keep going, and nothing can really stop them. And she's super excited. So this cartoon on top is indicating your learning curve. The brain is designed that it just makes a lot of mistakes. Yeah, she'll go downhill for some time. It does a lot of mistakes. It will clear out what didn't work and will straighten the connections in the brain that did work. And that's how you learn. You just do a bunch of mistakes. And if somebody tells me here in this room that you're not good at math, I'll tell you, you haven't failed enough times to be good at it. So don't tell me you're not good at math. I know several of you like to say it. And no, you just haven't done it yet. Although I do have to take a disclaimer here about making mistakes. Make sure you're safe before you do your mistakes. Because if you can hurt yourself, that's not a very good idea. And some activities don't welcome mistakes at all. For example, if you're doing a surgery, or doing skydiving, or prepping media for freshman labs, you can't make mistakes, right? There is no space. So this is a different kind of learning. It requires some guidance, some experienced person next to you who will help you through this. But this all made me think, how do we learn? How do those connections form? And how it will actually get affected by outside factors. So this is just some neurons on a Petri dish. And what I like about this little video is you can see that neurons are very flexible. They can change their connections, they can move, they can migrate. It's a very living tissue. It's not fixed in place like a lot of people thought. And this was one of the first talks when I get really inspired by idea of exercise. If you haven't seen this TED Talk by Wendy Suzuki, I highly recommend it. She is the funniest neuroscientist I ever heard. I was cracking up while hearing it. And at the end of those presentations, I'll have the links to all the videos and all the resources I mentioned today. But what she is saying pretty much is that she made an experiment on herself, that she hasn't been exercising, and she started exercising, and then during this TED Talk, she's explaining how it changed her life, and she completely changed the subject of your study and starting exercise and how they affect the brain. And here she is giving a little bit of her own personal advice of how much to exercise to benefit your brain. As you can see, the sections could be very short, around 30 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week. And power vacuum is counting. Now, a little bit of history. Originally, studying human brain was very difficult, right? Because if you open it, the person usually is dead. It's not that interesting. So a lot of studies were done on mice. And I'm sure a lot of you heard about GFP mice, those which can glow neurons. And when I did my USC study, I was, this sound just, oh, this is probably this thing. When I worked at USC, we did some studies with chicken embryos, and I was the one who would inject a virus with a GFP into the back neuron of chicken embryos. And then 2 weeks later, you can see those neurons glowing and growing, and it's very exciting. So this is an example of exercising mice, and you could see that those being injected with a virus, and after several weeks, they've grown new cells in hippocampus. So World Hippocampus, you will hear a lot from me today. It's a small area of the brain which you probably heard about, which is responsible for memory and learning. And usually people who has damaged hippocampus, they have amnesia. They can form new memories. So this is mice. You can make them glow, and it's very pretty. But what about human? Human are harder, but nevertheless, there was multiple studies in the past 10 years which led to very interesting discoveries in human brain. And before I go into it, they will be using exercise, different levels of exercise to imitate the effect. So here it is. There's 3 different amounts of intensity. So you can probably quickly estimate your own personal maximum heart rate and then see low intensity is something like walking, medium intensity is cycling to jogging, and high intensity would be full speed running. This way we'll be on the same page. And any kind of heart rate monitor will tell you how far you are. Like even Fitbit will tell you. So this is a very handy tool, and scientists use this intensity a lot to guide their research on the brain. So this is one of the first studies on how one single exercise session can affect your attention. So this was done on adults, and they were doing cycling on a stationary bike. And after the cycling, they were doing a memory test with various ages. And when I mentioned some sort of article, I added a number at the end, which is just basically how many times somebody cited this article. It's an indirect measure of how important this finding was. When you look up articles, you can pay attention to that too. It's very easy to see on Google Scholar. So those are 2 very similar papers. One was just measuring the performance, and The other one was very similar, also involving cycling, and they were doing slightly different tests. And both showed the same result, just one boost, 15 or 30 minutes cycling. This one was the first structural study on the brain that showed that only one area of hippocampus is affected by exercise, and this area is indicated in red right here. And this area is responsible for memory, for formation of new memories. So that was very exciting, especially this particular paper by Pereira in 2007. They did mice and humans simultaneously. So they actually looked at human and mice at the same time. And they found that mice and humans learn absolutely the same way. And exercise affects the brains in the same way too. So the reason how they could look into the brain of human here, they're using blood volume, using MRI. So MRI lets you go through the tissues. And you can't really see neurons, but you can see the blood flow. And usually there is a strong correlate between the blood flow and some sort of neurogenesis or active processes, because something which is growing or actively firing consumes a lot of oxygen. When you consume a lot of oxygen, you need a lot of blood. So when you see those kind of images, when a lot of blood flowing into one area, it means that something is going on here. And the same papers, they did have some post-mortem images taken of the human brains, and they found that, in fact, there was neurogenesis or cell division going on right here. This is another study on children. And they took a different approach. They didn't make children exercise. They just break them in two parts. They threw away all the medium children and just kept the low fitness and high fitness, and compare them on how big their hippocampus already is at the age of 10. And they found that kids which has more fit in general have significantly higher size of the hippocampus on both sides of their brain, which means just being fit already makes you smarter. Isn't it great? I've seen this before, and that's a little overwhelming, but this is my summary slide. And I'm going to break it down and go slowly. First, I want to discuss those signals which get released during the exercise, and then I'll touch on the different neurotransmitters and neuropeptides, which is getting also released during exercise. So here we go. Okay. When you exercise, it's a stress for your body. And there is multiple different signals that your body sends to the rest of the systems saying, I'm in stress. So one of those in the insulin-like growth factor. Insulin-like growth factor is released by multiple organs in the body, including muscles and liver and brain in young children. That's why they learn so well, but not in adults. So we have to exercise. And this insulin-like growth factor looks like insulin a little bit. So it helps to regulate sugar and insulin receptors in the body. It has tons of different functions, but I want to only focus on the one which has something to do with the brain at this moment. And that would be that these factors actually getting through the brain-blood barrier inside the brain and involved in neurogenesis and BDNF, which I'll just talk a little bit later in the brain, but it leads to the neuroplasticity over here, or formation of new memories. Then the next factor is called vascular endothelial growth factor. It is released when muscles are deprived of oxygen. So when you go into anaerobic mode of your running, your muscles suffering, and they send a signal. It's another stress signal, saying I need more oxygen. This growth factor stimulates growth of blood vessels everywhere, in muscles and in the brain. Another interesting feature of this factor is it actually makes blood-brain barrier is temporarily penetratable. So a lot of different factors can walk into the brain while you're exercising, including those guys, which is produced in the brain naturally when it's an embryo or very young child, but in adults, those factors usually don't produce in the brain. So in order to get in, you actually have to exercise. And they do a lot of good things there. As you could see, with age, a lot of those factors just decline in general. When we're young, like Vika, who was snowboarding, she has all of those growth factors right there, and she can just learn very quickly. But once we go older and older and older, it's getting harder for us to learn new skills, and you're like, oh, this is hard, because you don't have enough growth factors. That's why aerobic exercise, when you actually stress your muscles a little bit, they release all of those hormones and growth factors that can benefit your brain. Another growth factor, which is very crucial for brain growth, is a fibroblast growth factor. It's also released when muscles are getting very exhausted, when you're so tired that you can't move anymore. So, which indicates that when you exercise, it's actually nice to find your limit and go to your limit if you can. That's when the good stuff starts happening. And this signals the tissue growth in many different parts of the body, including the brain. And it's one of the main factors which has the best effect on the axon branching. And what do you think axon branching is good for? Oh, building those new connections. So now we got finally to BDNF. This is how many of you heard about BDNF before? BDNF? Nobody? Oh my God, this is so exciting. BDNF was found about 15 years ago, so that was a while. And once people found that this is a crucial component of memory and learning, they started publishing and publishing and publishing on BDNF, first in mice and other animals and in human, and they found that this is a miracle grow for your brain. It makes your neurons branch. So for example, if you have a Petri dish with neurons and you add a little bit of BDNF on the Petri dish, the neurons will start sprouting connections. Same going on in the brain. It sprouts the connections, and it increases neurogenesis. But the trick is, if you even increase BDNF in your brain, and if you don't use it, those connections will be very short-term. Same goes on with people who is experiencing depression, for example. People with depression, they have very low BDNF and other serotonin and dopamine levels in the brain. And everything's just slow like a swamp. That's why people prescribe antidepressant to shake them up. But then, if they don't start building the connections and creating new experiences, those connections just degrade. You either use it or you lose it, right? Brain is very, very pragmatic. It doesn't keep the connections that you don't use. So everything you don't use, you lose eventually, unless it's a very important childhood memory, something related to smell. Okay, now my favorite, runner's height. There is some more chemicals that are involved while you're exercising. One of them you probably haven't heard also about, since you haven't heard about BDNF. This is arterial natriuretic peptide. It's released by the heart. And it's released only when the heart is pumping really, really hard in an aerobic mode. And when people start studying this, they found that ANP is very low in people with panic attacks. And they're like, I wonder why. Well, because those people don't have natural braking system. So they will start the stress response, but they can't finish it. And this is what puts the brakes on the system of stress. That's why some people say when they go for a run, they feel better about a stressful situation. Or they want to go punch somebody, right? Punch them. Pillows and stuff and feel better afterwards. That is how ANP is getting released. And you feel more satisfied. Then there is two more. I'll probably start with the endocannabinoids. Why it has such a funny name? Well, when the people start actually studying marijuana and cannabinoids, they found receptors that it binds to in the human brain. And they start getting curious what those receptors are there for. Clearly not to get high, right? They was there for some reason. And they were starting looking for natural compound that is bound into those endocannabinoid receptors. So they found several chemicals, and one of them, anandamide, that is released during exercise. It binds those receptors just like cannabinoids does, and they dull the pain in the spinal cord and increase dopamine, so you feel good about yourself. So endocannabinoids often released during long stretches of running. That's why we have those kind of people like Dean Karnazes. Have you heard about Dean Karnazes? Nobody? It's an ultra-marathon runner. He was running 50 marathons in 50 days. And he started when he was 30 on his birthday. He was drunk at the bar, didn't know what to do with his life. And then he went home, put on some sneakers and started running. And since that day, he's running for miles and miles every day. And he's not running, he's not a nice person to be around. And people were looking at somebody like this, why is he running so much? Well, clearly they are experiencing the runner's high. And just like smoking marijuana will put you in a stress mode if you're not smoking, because your receptors are not combined with endocannabinoids anymore. Same with running. People who run regularly, they're actually getting very impatient and angry if they not having the opportunity to run. My husband runs, so I know if he didn't run for a day, just let him go and run. But is it bad to be dependent on something like this? Doctor said it's not, because running itself is so natural for you that and unless you run 50 marathons in 50 days, if you do it moderately, running is actually very good for our bone system and muscles and lungs, and it reduces cardiovascular disease. So being dependent on this kind of drug is a good thing. Now, endorphins. Well, you probably heard about endorphins. Everybody, yeah? Endorphins. It's a pleasure hormones. Endorphins also have properties of dealing with pain and the feeling of euphoria. So endorphins are released when you finally accomplish something you worked on very long time. For example, your project finally submitted, or no. That's what you feel, endorphins here. So the boost of all of those get released while you exercise. And after the exercise for several hours, people experience the runner's high, when you feel calm, relaxed, at peace, and just completely happy. And this is the proof of runners and cyclists and the level of their endocannabinoids here. They almost doubled after the exercise. How long did they exercise? I think it was 30 minutes. It's not very long. Okay, some more. Hippocrates said, if you're in a bad mood, go for a walk. And if you're still in a bad mood, go for another walk. And he said it long before all the brain imaging system been available. He just knew about it. Why so? Because not only high intensity exercise is positive. Low intensity, like walking, are actually very beneficial for the mood. And there is a whole books written about it. The book which I am was very inspired by John Rathe. He said that running or walking or exercising in general is just like taking some Prozac and Adderall. Prozac you probably heard about. It's prescribed for depression and it increase available serotonin in the brain. And Adderall, it's increase in tension by increasing amount of dopamine in the brain. Both of those have very strong side effects because they just create a huge disbalance of one neurotransmitter against other neurotransmitters. What running is doing, it balances all of them. It brings them up and then balances them out. And all of them, noradrenaline, serotonin, dopamine, they all stay in the balance level. Okay. Now we're going into treating of dementia. Those are the pictures of healthy brain and the brain of person who has Alzheimer's. There was a famous NANS study. Anybody heard about NANS study? Awesome. Nobody. There was a big community of nuns in the United States, and at some point they decided they'll donate their bodies to science when they die. And scientists decided to do a survey of those nuns while they were alive, and then once they're dead, they examined their brains. And what they found that sometimes the nuns will be completely intelligent and healthy, but when they die and they look at their brains, they will see something like this, which means it's a brain of the person who should have complete dementia. They shouldn't be able to remember anything. They shouldn't be able to function, even though those nuns were completely healthy, no symptoms of Alzheimer. And they start looking at the way those nuns lived and what kind of different things they did. And they found that those nuns, they would challenge their brains with mental puzzles, reading, and they would do daily exercises, including their brain exercises. So they found that, very interesting, if people are doing exercises or maintaining their active learning throughout their life, they might go Alzheimer's symptom-free, even though their brain will be damaged. And they were wondering, how that's even possible? You would have such a brain and you don't have any symptoms. And they found that what exercise and mental training does, it creates a lot of extra connections. It wires more. It has more potential. So even if you lose some of it due to Alzheimer's, you still have enough to maintain the basic needs and basic memories. And remember, the brain is very flexible. If it loses one connection, it can use another one. It's like traffic. If you have a 4 or 5 traffic jam, you can go around. Same with the brain. If there is a damage here, it will go around it. But it needs to have enough roads to go around. Otherwise, it will develop an Alzheimer. So the point of those studies, and there is another very cool talk about Lisa Genova on Alzheimer's, how it developed and how people overcome Alzheimer's with exercise. And those people show that if you want to increase your chances not to have a dementia once you're old, you can try to exercise. This study looked at the aerobic exercise and how it reduced the risk of Alzheimer's later in life. And they showed that even especially important for people who is reaching the midlife to start exercising, because that gives them a huge buffer of symptom-free in case if they, for example, Alzheimer's is running in their family, or they have a gene variation that makes them predisposed to have Alzheimer's. It could be that just being more fit, usually just being more fit, older people have less problems with cardiovascular disease, and they have less problems with high sugar and cholesterol, so they're just generally more healthy, and their brain is automatically more healthy because their body is healthier. So they were looking into the fact if it's actually the side effect or the real thing. And they found that they both play a very important role. And there is some recommendations that they do to prevent dementia. And those recommendations can go not just for people to prevent dementia, but for people to prevent depression, for people to prevent anxiety. You need to build more connections and make them active. So one is to create supply and demand in your brain. So what means supply? Supply is when you supply your brain with neurotropic factors, like the ones I just talked about. Insulin-like, fibroblast, and VEGF. Those factors get into your brain and prime the brain to grow. But if you don't use the new neurons which are dividing and you're not using the new connections which are forming, they actually degrade. And that's why you need to also create a demand for new circuits. And what could be a new demand? You can think of your own demand for the brain. I wrote some which came to my mind. New experiences help to form new memories. Socialization is very important part because we're social beings, and socialization, positive socialization with friends and family is important for any kind of mental health. If you think of anybody with any issues, they usually don't have strong social connections, because that's the one which produces us with a lot of social cues, and we can learn and form a lot of neurocircuits right there. Learning new skills doesn't have to be physical skills. It could be learning how to draw pictures and learning how to speak new language. So you probably heard about people who graduated from schools, they start taking classes and doing different hobbies to maintain this learning process. And you're probably actually in a very good spot right now, because research shown the longer time you spend at school, the less likely you will develop any abnormalities later in life. Did you hear about this? It's directly correlated, amount of years in school correlated with the probability you develop dementia later in life. So you probably won't. And the reason is because you get used to learning, you get used to challenging yourself with taking tests and taking exams, so you're probably looking forward to not to do it ever again. But actually, when you graduate, you'll probably take another career which will be very similar. And you'll continue to challenge yourself and taking tests and exercising your brain. Speaking of tests, active recall is one of the great ways to challenge your brain. And taking exams, which you probably don't like, is so good for you. Writing reports or reflections, which you probably also don't appreciate. Extremely good for your brain. And if you can teach somebody something you know how to do, it's one of the best recall skills you could do for yourself. So teachers rarely have dementia. It's very, very interesting. So professors, good job. So hopefully, after you leave this room today, you'll appreciate a little more all the assignments you're doing, because this is the active recall, and it's extremely good for your brain. It's building new connections. And hopefully, those connections will stay around until you're 80 years old. And you can use those connections to remember where you put your car keys. Isn't that great? That would be very useful. Okay. Now a little bit into exercising program. This is an ideal. And I don't know if I'm supposed to show it to you because it must just swamp some people and say, no way. But if you think about it, it's 6 hours a week. 6 hours a week is 5% of your time, active time, not even sleeping. That's a recommendation that's been done by the author of the book. And I don't think I can follow it completely. But getting something like Fitbit or Apple Watch probably have similar apps, which will keep track of how much you exercise in a week, will give you approximately average of how you're doing. You don't have to feel bad that you didn't exercise today, because in a month you still get a good number. For example, you went on a trip for the weekend in the mountains and was hiking there for 2 days in a row and compensated. So 6 days. 4 days, he suggested moderate activity. Moderate activity is light jogging, fast walking, cycling, something pleasant for about an hour. And 2 days, he suggested to have a shorter workout with a high intensity and some sort of resistance training or balance training or yoga, something within those lines. And people who don't have any time, which probably most of us here, can always aim for 10 steps a day. How about this? Raise your hand if you make often more than 10,000 steps a day. Let's see. No professors. We get about 30%? Oh, they're organic. Good job. Well, because he skates, that counts. So yes, if you get this goal down, you're halfway there. Because this is 5 miles a day, and you can convert those 5 miles into how much you run or walked. For people who haven't exercised as much, that's 3 hours of walking a week is it's an easy start. Something you can totally do. And this is, you can convert into steps and just have it here, park away from the entrance into the mall, take stairs. You probably see me on the stairs all the time, never take elevator until I have a car or something. Because stairs is a wonderful way to get your steps done. So if I see somebody in the elevator, you know, I'll give you a face. But why did he say that we should incorporate high-intensity exercise? I mentioned a little bit about it earlier into the hormones which is released by heart, but that's not it. There is something very cool about high-intensity exercise, and this one you might actually know. This one is called human growth hormone. Anybody? Human growth hormone. Yeah, okay, Health and Human Science, over there, got it. This has a common name of a fountain of youth. So this human growth hormone is released a lot when we're young, and as soon as we get older into the adulthood, it drops. And without it, a lot of muscles don't grow, bones get weakened. So we need to pump up that growth hormone somehow. And the best way to pump this hormone is to do high-intensity exercise. And high intensity, if you remember, is what? 75 to 90 of heart rate. It's a fast running. So for example, 30 seconds of sprinting can give you increase in, I think it's 6-fold. Yes, 6-fold increase in growth hormone, and it stays in the bloodstream for up to 4 hours. Just 30 seconds, you can think about it. Just wait until your class is like almost starting, and then you run to it, so you make it for 30 seconds. And then you come to your class all pumped up with growth hormone and just wipe everything out. Except right immediately after, the blood actually goes away from the brain into the muscles to support the muscles. So right after, you kind of not very smart. So don't do it before the test. But give it about 15, 20 minutes, and the blood will come back, and you'll get smart again. Okay, so this brain hormone is released in a pituitary gland, and it goes into the skeleton muscles, making them grow. So if you guys want to get some muscles, you would do high-intensity exercise, or either goes by interval training, when you go low, high, that's to build the muscles, or burn the fat. If you have some extra fat you want to get rid of, that's another one. Interval training, the one which hurts and you don't like it, that's the kind you need to do. It's also very good for bones, because bones realize that they need to be stronger and they just start to building up. Health and Human Science has a very cool machine, can measure your bone density. You can probably go and they can measure it for you. I don't know if it's available. It was pretty cool. And I think Burns Recreation Center can do it too, for free, for students. So you can go and check out your bone density. And if it's not high enough, you should start doing your interval training. Because otherwise, osteoporosis, not that good. And as you can see over here, here's our familiar growth factor, insulin-like. So it's actually get released during the high-intensity exercise too, especially high. And these guys have been shown to help all the organs as well as the brain to grow. So if you don't have time, you can always squeeze some 30 seconds of burpees or squats or fast-speed running. So for example, the author of the book, John Wright, when he exercises, he does 40 minutes of jogging with 5 intervals of 20 to 30 seconds when he runs as fast as he can until you exhaust, pretty much. You could do it on a treadmill or you can do it outside, but that's pretty much you go to your maximum. Sounds pretty difficult, right? Okay, so I was talking all about those hormones, and including this wonderful hormone, all of them are stress hormones. So actually, high-intensity exercise can induce anxiety in some people, which is not a good thing. We probably don't want more anxiety in your life right now. So a lot of professional athletes also doing yoga. And yoga's been studied quite well and shown that if you do yoga, you induce GABA release up to 27% up in your brain, which slows down all the anxiety and helps you relax. And this is a suggestion I took from one of the athletes' websites, how they suggest to balance yoga and competition. So it peaks when the competition is low. But they pretty much alternate yoga and high-intensity works out. So that sounds fantastic, but it works only for experienced practitioners. Because if you've been in a yoga class here, you probably know that you struggled so much there. There's no GABA here. This is torturing. So yes, you have to practice yoga for a while in order to get the benefits of the deep breathing and GABA. So it's okay to actually feel even more anxious during the class of yoga for the first several months. Just always keep in mind that it will get better. You will actually get your GABA a little later. But then, yeah, this phase I've seen a lot. Because one of the things I actually do here at LMU, I do try to go to yoga class around noon on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And there's the same teacher for like 6 years, I think. Her name is Hannah. And she's been teaching when I came. And I'm taking her class, and it's still challenging. This is amazing, but I love it. And my GABA is definitely getting there. But let's say you're sitting right now and thinking like, okay, I'm not going on that treadmill because that's what will kill me. And honestly, I'm not a treadmill person either. I think dream is not for everybody. But there is good news. There are different things you could do in life. And California is a wonderful place to be because we have a wonderful weather, and you can be outside almost 100% of the time. You can go hiking and camping. The mountains are like full of forest. in the summer and have snow in the winter, and you can go surfing outside, which is free. And this is, I don't know, some people probably know what it is. We went camping with some TAs in Joshua Tree last February, about a year ago. And that's us over there, climb all the way on the giant boulder. It was a wonderful weekend and very cold. But, okay, well, let's see. There are other different kind of activities you could do. It doesn't have to be extreme. And they all could be outside and fun and doesn't look like a treadmill or bicycle cycling. And all of them will boost your brain just like that. So I didn't explain. This is a brain of a quite famous drummer. And what he's doing right here, he's playing drums. So you can see, it's actually very interesting. Again, you can see the blood flow. This is not actual activity, it's a blood flow. That's what measured by MRI. But you can see playing drums on its own fires up your brain from the prefrontal cortex to the back. I don't think they did cerebellum over here. I'm sure it has to be involved. Cerebellum is responsible for motions. And this is the brain of embryo zebrafish. And zebrafish embryos are wonderful because they're almost transparent, and you can record their brain activity just like that. What you see here is a calcium ion exiting the neurons. And what is this fish is doing? When it's gray, it doesn't move, and when it starts moving, it fires up. So the point of those two images is when you move your body, your brain is on fire. And when your brain is on fire, it's building connections. And those connections will last for a long time and hopefully will prevent from any kind of disease. So I hope you're all excited, like right now, because this is one of the books which got inspired me when I wrote it. That's a John Ratey. I read and listened to this book. For my husband, it was too much, he said. Too many terms, but that was my favorite part. So this book doesn't have too many terms, and it's focusing more on the mood benefits of exercise, and this one has everything. Pretty much everything I talked about today, except for the articles, came from this book. And you can listen it while running. To keep you excited. I actually did that for some time. But I still see some faces which is like, I'm not sure. So that's why the third book is for you. Have anybody here seen this book before? 1, 2? Okay, well, it's a must-have for students. Amazon, all of them are $10, really. So this is how to get this exercise into your routine. Not just exercise, anything. Anything you think is good for you, but you just cannot incorporate it into your life because you don't have time, energy, or will, that's how you do it. And it walks you through the process of how to develop a habit. And it's very funny because developing a habit takes about how many days? 21 days. Do you know how long it takes for a neuron between it's being produced in hippocampus, newborn neuron, to be incorporated into the neurocircuit? Actually, 21 days. It takes exactly the same time. And if it's not getting incorporated, those newborn neurons dying. So if you're not incorporating your neurons, they usually just die. But it takes about 21 days. And this is very interesting how neurobiology correlates with books on habits and, pretty much habits. A bunch of books on habits tell about how to get rid of bad habits and build new habits. It takes 21 days of repeating something. It's unpleasant, but you can get there. That would be nice. You can exercise. But something is just not for, I tried to develop a habit of waking up in the morning, miracle morning thing. There was a person who gave a talk on miracle morning. And I was on it 21 days, doing my miracle morning. Yep. And then I read the articles, and some people just not miracle morning people. And it's like, oof, I'm glad. Otherwise, I would feel bad about myself. Somebody just owls. And in fact, some of this presentation was done at night. I'm just a night person. Okay. Am I going over time? No. I have 5 minutes. Okay, perfect. So if you're interested in any of those, I'll send you the links to pretty much anything. This is my favorite TED Talks on the topic. A lot of them I used today, but those are 15 minutes. You can always watch them. I'll send you the links if you want to. This is a scientific article references, which you can always refer to. There's a lot of them. And I really hope by now you are just dying to ask a question, right? Okay. I will be repeating the questions just in case.
So do people with depression who take antidepressants, if they don't create new experiences, does the BDNF, like the purpose of BDNF, reduce?
Yes. So the question is, if people with depression don't build new experiences, does the purpose of the treatment is reduced? Yes, it does. So antidepressants create increase in BDNF and serotonin, and it temporarily helps you feel like you can do things, right? You can get out of the house, you can exercise, you can meet people, and those people need to use this opportunity to start building new habits, getting outside, developing relationships, because as soon as they stop taking medication, it goes back to previous state, unless they get out of there by building new connections. Yeah, and restoring the balance of the neurotransmitters. That's why Rotte actually suggested that combining exercise and medication is the best way to treat any kind of disorder, because medication helps you to get to the level where you can even consider them exercise, right? And from there, you can slowly substitute it.
Did anyone in your research say that weightlifting or cardio is better?
So what's better, weightlifting or cardio? I've seen that doing squats is 2 times more effective than running, fast-speed running. So they said doing weights actually could be more beneficial because it's even bigger stress for the organism. So it releases more hormones. You're completely right. I didn't touch on it, but lifting weights is even more beneficial than running. You have a lot of questions.
Yeah. So if marijuana has the same effect and brings a person to a euphoric state, could it replace exercise, or would it cause other physical and mental harm?
The person who gave a talk not a long time ago, so she asked about what's better, exercise or marijuana. And there was, and Jim said that actually it would be nice if marijuana could kill the pain, and especially patients with cancer. But he said, unfortunately, body develops resistance to it very quickly. And that's why he suggested for anxiety to use endocannabinoids on the skin, like rubbing your cheeks instead of taking it in, because everything which is not produced by the body, we get used to it. We build up resistance. Our receptors are very smart. They will get used to it. And you will need either to increase the dose or switch to a different drug, which is usually happened with people who is taking marijuana. They switch to opioids, unfortunately. Yeah. So that's why exercise is better, because it doesn't develop the same resistance and does keep long-term benefits going and habits. But it can produce some sort of addiction too. So I recommend exercise. Okay. Everybody satisfied? If you want a copy of this PowerPoint or links, send me an email. I'm sure you can find my email somewhere.